Good afternoon. Thank you for tuning in for August 2024 Director's Cut. We will begin with Assistant Director of Mineral Resources, Mark Bohrer.
Good afternoon. As Bridget said, I'm the Assistant Director of the Oil and Gas Division. My name is Mark Bohrer, here to give the Director's Cut for August 2024, going over the June 2024 production numbers. First off, I'd like to lead off with some news. I'm sure some people have heard that Nathan Anderson has been offered or been named the next director of DMR. And I spoke to him yesterday after he was announced, and we had a good conversation. I understand right now they're in the negotiating his terms of his employment. So looking forward to having Nathan come on board and be our next director. The oil production numbers for June, we were at 35,267,022 barrels. That equates to 1.175 million barrels per day. That's down roughly 2%. Wasn't that all that surprising? Looking at the data, we had 121 less wells producing in June than we did in May, and our completion numbers are still down a little bit. But the good news is the July completions look like they're going to be up, so hopefully that'll have a positive impact on our production numbers. Crude oil prices, they've been holding pretty steady, although today I looked at the prices and they're down a little bit. So we'll see how that plays out on the long-term average. Our gas production and capture, we're at we produced 104,181,310 million cubic feet a day in June. That equates to 3,472,710 MCF per day. That's down about 1%. We're at 95% capture, or 94% capture in June. And well, I think I read the wrong numbers for the June capture numbers was 98,198,341 MCF. That equates to 3.2 BCF per day. A little bit of news on the gas production and capture. We had some gas plants that were down in June. That led to a little bit more flaring. So that's just part of the normal operations. Wells permitted. May was at 95, June we were at 78, and July we were at 107, so that's good news. We want to be in that 90 to 100 wells per month to grow our production. Rig counts remain steady. We have 372 wells waiting on completion. That's up a little bit, so hopefully when those come online, that'll contribute to an increase in our production. Completions were up. In July, we were at 79. That's a nice uptick. We need about 90 to 100 per month to grow our production. In June, we had 18,973 wells producing. As I said, that's down about 121 from May. Roughly, or 16,891 wells are Bakken or Three Forks wells. They account for 89% of our well count, and 11% or 2,082 are from conventional or legacy pools. On the initial grant from the IIJA funding, we've started for reclamations where those are ongoing. We completed 3 in May, 5 in June, and those are ongoing. On Fort Berthold Reservation, they produced roughly 196,000 barrels of oil per day. That's up a little bit for the reservation. That's good news for them. They have 10 wells waiting on completions and 121 drilling permits approved. A few comments. The drilling rig count remains low due to mergers and acquisitions, but hopefully it'll return to the mid-40s over the next few years. There are currently 13 active frac crews in the state. Statewide gas flared volume from May to June increased 31.8 million cubic feet a day to 199.4 million cubic feet a day. And the statewide gas capture decreased 1% to 94, and the Bakken gas capture also decreased to 94%, down 1%. As I said, we had some gas plants that were undergoing maintenance and turnaround. Statewide, as I said, we're at 94%, 94% statewide Bakken, 94% non-Fort Berthold Bakken. On the reservation, they're at roughly 97% gas capture, so that's good news. And the fields that we keep an eye on, because they've historically had a few issues, like I said, due to those gas plant outages, a lot of those fields were down a little bit. There's a few that were up, but most of them were down. And with that concludes my report. I would take any questions.
You have one?
I do, unless you call it.
Yes, please.
Go ahead.
How are you feeling about archiving 1.3 million barrels per day by the end of the year? Seems we've been staying steadily below that mark.
1.1 million barrels per day?
1.3.
1.3?
Yeah.
And how do I feel about archiving that?
Yeah.
Or achieving that? Yeah, I don't know how to archive it, but I think it'll be a struggle. We've had a couple of months of down production. Hopefully the July numbers will turn that around and we'll see a little bit of uptick, but we're hopeful.
Thank you.
I'm curious, where is the Assiniboine area?
That's in northwest McKenzie County.
And that's 100%. So
yeah. And a lot of those fields, I mean, that you have to look at beyond the numbers here, because some of those are fairly small fields, so 1 or 2 wells can make a big difference. But like I said, there was some outages that contributed to some of this, and that, like the Charleston field, that's a big field. I mean, so being that high, and it was up 4% from last month, that's very encouraging. There's a lot of good production in the Charleston area. But a lot of these are smaller fields. Lone Butte, it's got some activity and some production there. That's at 93%. That's a very rugged area. So seeing those kind of numbers in that type of topography is very, very encouraging.
this is an off-the-wall question. When people have come up with off-the-wall questions.
Okay.
But I see that we're down to 30,000 or 31,000 barrels a day from legacy, about 3%. Is that a low? Is that the lowest out of the legacy?
It's been in that range for a while now. That certainly jumps out at you. And I've made the comment in the past that, it looks like we have all our eggs in one basket here, but it's a pretty good basket. It's a big oil field, so it's not that concerning. We would like to see those numbers grow. Hopefully, at some point, people will focus some of their efforts towards these legacy pools. And of course, as you're aware, there's been a lot of Bakken wells drilled, so there's a lot of information that they've gained, but it probably isn't as attractive as a Bakken, so it may be something that they're going to look at later on. But they've gathered a lot of information over a wide area of the state.
I have one other off-the-wall question.
Okay.
I would be remiss if I didn't have, right? Yep, pretty much. Driving basically in western North Dakota to Medora and looking, and I noticed that some wells weren't pumping, and it just got me thinking. When a pump jack goes out of service, what happens to it? Is it moved or is it done for scrap metal?
So, the question was, you driving down the highway, you observe a pump jack that isn't operating. It could be that the well is on a timer and it's just not producing when you drive by. But to the further extend your question, when a well is no longer economic, they decide they're going to plug it. Usually the most valuable thing left on that location is the pump jack, and they just pick them up and haul them on a flatbed to another location and reuse them. So
they are reusable, probably.
Yes.
Time and time again.
Yes.
There's another question. What do you think of the state's oil and gas lease sale the other day? Quota was less than in February 2024.
I have not followed up on that, so I can't comment on that.
That should be it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. We now have Director of Pipeline Authority, Justin Kringstad.
Perfect. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Justin Kringstad, Director of the North Dakota Pipeline Authority. We'll get rolling on some of the production we're seeing in our neighboring states. Eastern Montana still holding tight at 1 drilling rig active. They are seeing some success in their oil production numbers, some small incremental expansion and development over there. Is showing up in the data, and it's showing up in barrels of oil. It's showing up in MCF of gas that need to be managed in our overall system. And then South Dakota remaining at 0 drilling rigs, and so they're just continuing to see pretty steady production over on that part of the basin. On slide 3, we'll focus really on that bottom third of this graphic. We hit another record for the GOR, gas oil ratio, in the state at 2.95. That is the highest we've had in development history here for the Bakken Three Forks. And so again, we're going to see ups and downs with this trend, but the general consensus is that we're going to see this continue to move up and to the right as these wells age. Again, I liken it, for those that are not familiar with what's going on there, think about a diet soda pop, right? You've got the fizz in there, the bubbles, that natural gas is entrained in that Bakken oil. And in order to develop that Bakken barrel of oil, you're going to get the natural gas that comes up with it. You can't take a sip of your soda pop without the fizz. You can't bring up a Bakken barrel of oil without the natural gas entrained in it. So, and then as those wells age, that pressure depletes. We see more and more gas released downhole, and that GOR continues to move upwards. So, again, from an infrastructure standpoint, this is something that we're continuing to plan for and monitor. So as we look at the crude oil movements, you're going to notice some differences here this month, and that has to do with the refinery in Mandan, North Dakota, going down for its turnaround. The last time was 7 years ago. They started that towards the first part of June, and that finished up right at the end of July, first part of August, getting back up as far as I'm aware. And so when we look at the graphs on slide 5, where we saw that uptick, again, going into this, it's difficult to tell if we were going to see an uptick in pipeline movements, uptick in rail, or the combination of the two. And where we really saw the uptick was on pipeline movement. So excess space that was available in our crude oil transportation network largely took all of that excess production that wasn't going to the refinery during that time frame. We look at pricing around the U.S. This was as of May, so this wouldn't be reflecting anything here as of late, but that's the most recent data we have. PAD 1, PAD 5 being the highest priced markets and really on par with each other within a penny. And so when we look at the rail economics and what the refiners are demanding in these centers, we continue to see PAD 5 on the West Coast be the lion's share for that roughly 2 trains a day that we're moving out of North Dakota. So that's been fairly steady now for quite some time. And then again, from the EIA, breaking down some of their destination data, 80-20 split between the West Coast and the East Coast for where those North Dakota barrels are headed. Some good news on the pricing side. That Clearbrook market is back up in the positive. There was a time period for a number of months where we saw that go negative. Again, largely tying back to some of the price dynamics taking place up in Canada. So anytime we see that near zero or even above, that's a big win for the Bakken. That's our closest transparent pricing point, and does reflect fairly closely with what we're seeing here in the state. And then you can see again, Brent WTI spread less than $3. So again, as folks are looking at what to do with some of those flexible barrels and where they're going to be marketed, that's all going to influence some of those decisions. No major changes. We'll on the imports exports, we did see In the natural gas side, as Mark was discussing, a little slight uptick in the amount of flaring. He touched briefly on a number of plants that were going through maintenance events in the month of June. And so when we look at this 6%, historically, if we would go back 5-10 years or so, when gas plants went down for maintenance, the unfortunate reality there is we saw a lot of gas being flared. Today's environment is such that producers, if there's not an alternative interconnect for that gathering system to move that gas to a different processing facility, producers now in large part will choke back production and throttle back. And so that may also be reflected in why we saw that May to June production decrease. July, some additional maintenance was going on as well. And so again, real strong completion numbers trending upwards, but I think natural gas and some of the maintenance things there may be challenging those July numbers as well. So slide 12, I just touched on that a little bit. Slide 13, we did see for a short period of time more wells coming online than were being connected to gas gathering. That caught back up in June, which is a positive. That's something that if I saw any type of long-term trends, that would be concerning, certainly from a gas capture perspective here in the state. EIA is still has a pretty optimistic outlook here over the next 12 months. This is their August oil price outlook, so they're back above $80 for roughly the next 12 months or so. So they are anticipating pretty tight supply demand at the global level than here in the U.S., reflecting that in the prices. Natural gas processing, I won't dive too deep into that today. I've got some other natural gas topics I want to talk about here. First, on the interstate transmission side, as we've worked through some of those maintenance events, we're continuing to see that trend upwards for that northern border market share now somewhere between the 85 to 90% on any given day of how that natural gas dynamic and that competition is occurring on that system. We've seen the BTU numbers creep up a little bit again on there, still not outside of the range of what we would typically expect to see. So nothing really to talk about in detail there. I did want to just provide a quick update on the Wahpeton expansion project. So these are a couple fresh images from the weekly reports that come in, and you can see on that bottom right-hand table the activity in the left-hand side of that table, and then just focus on that right-hand side of how far along they are. So a lion's share of the grading work, the right-of-way work, the stringing the pipe out, bending of that pipe, and even over 50% of the welding is now complete. And then roughly a third of that pipeline system now being lowered into the ground and starting at least the backfill and reclamation process. So exciting to see that continue to move forward. Still expecting a late Q4 in-service timeframe. So that'll be a real big win for that southeast corner of the state as they get access to reliable natural gas service, where in the past it was an interruptible situation from a different alternative natural gas source. So excited for that, to continue to see that move forward. The other project I wanted to quickly talk about was made public at the end of July. That was the Kinder Morgan Double H pipeline conversion. For those of you that aren't as familiar with the infrastructure here, the top portion of this graphic has the crude oil pipeline system as it operates today in that map on the top left. And then you can see the red dotted area circled. That is where the Double H pipeline system, it collects crude oil from numerous gathering systems near the Door area of North Dakota, and then transfers that crude oil down towards Guernsey. It was announced in July that Kinder Morgan is going to convert that into natural gas liquids service. And so you can see the bottom map there on the bottom left corner, what our current NGL infrastructure looks like. So it will largely parallel the One Oak systems that are heading down towards that Wyoming market and then towards the mid-continent. And then you can see the reflection on the right-hand side of what that's going to mean for our crude oil dynamics. You can see in that top right chart, we will lose then that 88,000 barrels per day of pipeline capacity that Double H was providing the region. That'll take place about mid next year. And then first quarter of 2026 is when that system conversion is expected to be complete. And that would put that line then back into NGL service. So you can see, the dynamics at play where we were today a little bit long on some of our crude oil transportation options. And so when we look at our NGL needs, very, very significant needs going forward, even with this system conversion taking place. This is going to provide some additional breathing room. So this is certainly a big win for the basin as we continue to look at natural gas infrastructure on a holistic basis, all the way from the gathering, processing, transmission, on the residue that we typically talk about, and then the natural gas liquids, that component as well. All of those need to be aligned moving forward. So this is, again, as I would say, a big win for the basin as we continue to tackle this. So with that, I'd be glad to answer any questions.
So
Yeah, no, go ahead, Dave.
it just sounds like this is demand driven, correct?
But
Demand for NGLs.
yeah, correct. So the NGLs, when we produce that Bakken natural gas in the state, we have some of the richest, if not the richest, natural gas resource. When I say richest, that means highest percentages of propanes, butanes, natural gasolines, those natural gas liquids that are entrained in that natural gas as it comes up from the reservoir. The Bakken, again, is world-class on that front. So we have a tremendous need to process, separate those liquids, and then have an infrastructure system in place to move and market those liquids, not only here in the US, but export options as well.
And why Guernsey?
So just that crude oil system, Guernsey is another kind of regional crude oil hub. And so that system, when it was constructed and put into service to serve crude oil markets from North Dakota to Guernsey, and now that conversion, that's naturally where it's headed. So it'll have to tie into some additional NGL infrastructure there.
I don't mean to belabor the point, but there would be a market going east to if we could get a pipeline east for NGLs, I would assume.
So NGLs, so not to overlap. So the question was about, moving east through North Dakota, I'm assuming. Yep. So in North Dakota, the movement east and that push is largely on what we'd call the residue gas stream. So the dry components, not the natural gas liquid components. So both efforts happening simultaneously, but the big move and that push to move natural gas eastward is on the dry gas component. Yep.
I have one more
Yeah,
follow-up.
yeah.
We talked earlier about the idea for natural gas storage in North Dakota. What's the status of that now?
Yep. So the North Dakota, the Williston Basin, it's actually just on the Montana side near Baker, has North America's single largest natural gas storage field, and it's operational today. WBI Energy owns and operates that. It's moving natural gas in and out on a daily basis to meet some of the regional demand. As we look at opportunities here in the state for larger industrial users, power generation, a lot of discussion around data opportunities. Having access to natural gas storage is going to be a critical component. We've seen in the past winter storms be disruptive in North Dakota. They're disruptive in other parts of North America. So having interconnectivity of pipe, interconnectivity of storage, all plays into that higher dynamic of having a robust system to provide reliable energy where it's needed, when it's needed.
I think that's what
Anything? Okay. Any questions?
No question.
Okay.
Thank you so
Well,
much.
thank you, everyone.